from Josh Brandon, who's our next guest. And as I said, Josh is involved with the Greenpeace campaign, and Josh has written numerous articles and reports on sustainable agriculture and genetic engineering. His work has appeared in national publications including Canadian Dimension and Activist Magazine. He's the editor of the GE Free BC newsletter and serves on the steering committee for the Society for a GE Free BC. Josh is also on the National Council for the Canadian Environmental Network, where he has served on both the Agriculture and Convention on Biodiversity committees. And recently, Josh acted as civil society representative at a United Nations-led international agriculture assessment held in Johannesburg, South Africa. So Josh, come on up and welcome, and thank you for all your amazing work. Let's hear more about it.
Well, hearing about the sad case of Canada and its role in trying to overturn international moratorium on Terminator technology, and as well, you know, our shockingly bad record with being one of the few countries in the industrial world without mandatory labeling. Sometimes it makes me a bit sad to be here in Canada, but I'm very proud to be here in Victoria because I know that here the movement for GE-free zones and against genetic engineering is among the strongest in the country, because just a couple of months ago, there was a vote in the House of Commons for, it was a private member's bill for mandatory labeling of of genetically engineered products. And that bill failed, but we were running a campaign to encourage people to write in to their MPs, because that's one of the important ways we have of influencing our political system. And here in Victoria, I know that dozens of you wrote in to your MPs, and it was one of the largest clusters of report backs that I got from across the country. So I know that it's really important here. And then also just earlier this spring, I came here, the last time I was in Victoria was to deliver a petition, again calling for the mandatory labeling of GE foods. And there was over 22,000 people that signed our petition here, and we delivered it to the legislature here. So I know that we're in the right city for this, and I really think that this is a great starting point for creating a GE-free zone that's going to extend up the island and encompass the whole Vancouver Island region. GE-free zones around the world, there are over 3,000 GE-free regions that have declared themselves GE-free. And it's really important, that statistic, because as was mentioned, I just came back a couple of months ago from this UN meeting on agriculture. And this was an international agriculture assessment. It involved hundreds of scientists from around the world looking at the future of agriculture and asking the question, how can we feed people sustainably both for the environment and for social equity? And the conclusions that they came up with were that we don't need genetic engineering. Genetic engineering isn't going to be the solution for feeding the world. What we need to do is to support small-scale agriculture, support organic farming, and make recognition of the contribution of indigenous knowledge to agriculture, because that's also really important for the future. So how are we going to do that? I mean, the only way we can do that really is if we start protecting what we have, protecting our organic agriculture and our small-scale agriculture. And GE-free zones are going to be an important part of that process. And that's what I'd like to speak about just briefly today. So GE-free zones are an important part of a global movement, working to provide local solutions to a problem that is immense. It's been labeled by the Royal Society of Canada as being a problem which poses potential irredeemable threats to biodiversity, threats to human health, and also to the environment. Now, the Royal Society of Canada is pretty much the highest scientific body in the country. In 2001, the government convened the Royal Society of Canada and asked them to write a report on the future of biotechnology. And, you know, they expected they were going to get the same stamp of approval that they'd gotten from other scientists. You know, Monsanto had stamped these things as good, and Cargill says they like them. And so all the scientists the government had been talking to up until that point just loved GMOs. So then they sent it to this panel of independent experts, and they came up with 58 recommendations about genetically engineered foods, saying that actually the process for approving GMOs is unscientific. There's no peer review, that we really don't know how safe they are because there's been no long-term studies. There needs to be tracking of how they're released into the food system and what their effects are on people. So it was a very critical report, and unfortunately the government hasn't lived up to any of those recommendations, and we're still left with the situation that Tom was describing just now, where we don't really know what it is that we're eating. And so GE-free zones are an important part of trying to protect ourselves, to try to create reserves that provide at least a minimum protection against contamination that's caused by GE. Now, we know that contamination is pretty much inevitable once we do release genetically engineered crops into the environment. At Greenpeace and other organizations, we've compiled over 216 cases of documented contamination over the last 12 years through our GM contamination register. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because if you look at GE contamination, most cases either don't get reported or else there's cover-ups. You know, Percy can talk, I think he probably will talk a little bit about the pressure farmers are under to not report contamination when it occurs. So really, there's likely thousands of these cases that are occurring. And we can really never build protections, containment zones large enough or fences high enough to keep out the genetically engineered crops. They blow in the wind, the pollen, the seeds. They can get mixed in equipment that's used for transportation or processing. And they can also get stored in the fields themselves and come up in subsequent years. Some crops like canola can last up to a decade in the fields and still germinate. So it's really difficult to get rid of GE once it's into the environment. So what we need to do is to protect ourselves. And GE-free zones can minimize the likelihood of GE contamination. So in this way, we hope that by creating a genetically engineered free zone here on Vancouver Island, that we can start to preserve some of our biodiversity. Future generations are going to look to genetically engineered free zones and say, well, this is somewhere we can go back to, and we know that the crops there, they've been growing for years now, are safe, and there's a wide variety of crops grown there. And so future generations are going to come to Vancouver Island and expect to be able to preserve some of their seeds, because eventually communities around the world are going to recognize the mistakes we've made by releasing GE crops into the food system. You know, this isn't going to go on forever. We've seen the movement actually against GE crops grow exponentially over the years, and just seeing the energy over the past couple of days at these events and how people are responding to Percy Schmeiser and just the response we've had over the last couple of years with our campaign as well, it just shows that this is a growing movement, and more people are refusing GE. We're starting to see countries around the world actually create moratoria against growing GE. Even France now has a moratoria in place against growing genetically engineered corn, which is pretty much the only crop that was previously grown there. So, you know, it's a growing movement that we have, and we just need to keep up the momentum on that. G-free zones are especially important for organic farmers because organic farmers could lose their certification if their fields become contaminated. People have a right to consume organic food that they know is going to be free of pesticides and free of contamination by genetically engineered contamination. So by shopping at local farmers markets or the organic section of your local independent food store, you might expect to be able to find quality organic food. But unfortunately, this right is being taken away from us by the genetic engineering companies like Monsanto. And because of GE contamination, it's often difficult to find the organic products that we're looking for. For example, canola is pretty much not grown anywhere in this country organically anymore because of the rate of contamination. I've seen reports that even canola seed that's certified as being conventional, so not GE, actually has rates as high as 5% contamination in it. And that's right out of the, right from the bag. Now, then you think about as well, there's also other crops that are under threat. Just last week in the Fraser Valley, an organic farmer there sent me a sample of her crop, asking me to check to see if it was genetically contaminated. So it's a big fear for farmers across the province. Fortunately, her crop hadn't been contaminated, at least the sample she sent me. But it's just an ongoing fear that requires constant vigilance. Now, G crops also, we know now, are creating health problems, or at least posing health risks, because what we know is that the studies that Monsanto has done on these crops, they're actually not that valid. And the studies that the Canadian government is doing, they're actually not even doing their own independent research. One example of this, just to give one example, there's a type of genetically engineered corn that's grown here in Canada that was sent to be tested by Monsanto's own scientists, and we obtained a copy of their research results, and we sent those research results to independent scientists to ask them to reanalyze Monsanto's results. And what they found was that rats that were fed genetically engineered corn were actually showing higher rates of liver and kidney problems than rats that were fed conventional corn. So, and this is food that's in our food supply that's being fed to our families and grown here in Canada. So it's really big concerns about the environment, about health. G-free zones will also provide protection for the environment against the toxins that invariably follow G crops. Now, when you plant G crops in the field, your use of pesticides goes up dramatically. This is because a lot of the crops that we're growing that are genetically engineered here in Canada are actually designed to be used with brand name herbicides. So Monsanto's Roundup has Roundup-ready corn that you can grow using it, or same with Bayer's Liberty herbicide has its own genetically engineered crops to go along with it. And this is because most of the crops that are designed by the GE industry, they're designed to be resistant to these chemicals, which actually kill anything that's green. And so you spray these chemicals on your field, and it kills all the weeds, but you know, that stuff is still in the soil, it's still on the plants, and it's still in the environment. And more research is showing that chemicals like Roundup are actually much less safe than were originally thought, and it's because of the whole combination of chemicals that's used with those. Monsanto has invested heavily in genetic engineering, actually for precisely this reason. The whole movement towards genetic engineering was largely given impetus by the fact that Monsanto's patents on Roundup were coming to an end in the 1990s. And they were looking, well, you know, our profits are going down, our best-selling product is going to have its patents run out. What can we do to preserve its life cycle and its lifespan? Because they're much more concerned about the lifespan of their products than of our own lifespan. So what they did was they started patenting products that would be used with their brand name herbicide, and they started genetically engineering a way to force farmers to continue using their herbicide. So now they control the seed and they control the herbicide, and they just want to move each step along, controlling more and more of the food chain until they control our whole food supply. So this is really, it's never been about improving the environment. It's never been about improving the food products that are out there. Right now we have an initiative from Monsanto to bring us new higher yielding wheat and rice. They've invested $10 million into trying to create new genetically engineered forms of rice and wheat. And this is something that, you know, people around the world have rejected time after time again. And so it's really sick that they're using this case of a perceived crisis in the food supply to promote these products, when in fact in the end all we're going to see is the same kinds of products that we've seen already, either products that promote herbicide use or produce their own pesticides, like the BT crops, because that's what they'll give us in the end. It's not going to be some more nutritious form of rice or some higher yielding wheat product. So taken together, it's clear that GE crops actually are hurting farmers. They increase the amount of toxins that our families are exposed to and the toxins in our environment. And so it's no wonder that communities around the world are banding together to create GE-free zones and eliminate GE from their community. Here in British Columbia, GE-free zones have been made by municipal and district level resolutions. And although districts may lack the legal authority at times to impose the kinds of regulations we'd like to see, they do have an important place because they add moral authority to the voice of the community. And once the GE polluter knows that they may be held responsible for their contamination, that can give them second thought and pause for thought. So very often, though, it's mostly the moral issue that's at stake, because most often social change occurs because of changes in perceptions and changes in public values. And that's the first step to solving our problems. So we're here today, we're calling on everybody here in the room to become leaders in the movement to create GE-free zones here on Vancouver Island. And I hope that you'll continue to stay involved, sign our email list, and continue to be involved with us here. And I really hope that the discussion this evening will provide a platform for opening discussion on these values and be the first step toward making our province the first GE-free province in Canada. Thanks.